Yo, what's going on, y'all? First and foremost, I want to say, give a shout out to everyone that, gave me, wish me a happy birthday. You know what I'm saying? Really appreciated that. I find myself in these times, not that I really would have done much anyway, but I find myself in these times really having a difficult time enjoying my birthday and enjoying my birthday week. May 30th was my birthday, and actually, ever since then, every night, every day, there have been protests here in Tampa because of this moment that we're in right now as a country, as communities across this country, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting time. I think that this moment to so many people feels so similar. Like, to me, it feels so similar, but for some reason, this moment feels different. And I've been thinking to myself, I'm 37 now, by the grace of God, God's blessed me with health and, sound mind and body and so on. How can I really just commemorate my 37th year? You know what I'm saying? Didn't have a party, didn't go out, coronavirus, all that good stuff. But so what I think I'm going to do, God gave me this idea to just basically over the next 37 days have, 37 different conversations as it relates to this moment that we're in right now. I think that, I've been having a lot of different conversations with friends, colleagues, family, all that kind of stuff about what's happening right now in our country and what's going on. And I think a big issue relating to where we are right now is just the inability to have a conversation, inability to talk about race, inability to talk about, your fellow man and your fellow man's struggle. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to record, I'll go live with it, you know what I'm saying? But I'll record these and I'll put them on Instagram over the next 37 days. This first one I'll put on Facebook, but I will, the rest of them will only live on Instagram and such. So the first topic that I want to, talk about today as it relates to this moment that we're in is education. These are going to be very conversational. I don't have this scripted, I haven't written these things out, but, one of the aspects that I've talked about with friends and such as it relates to this moment is education. I think that, a lack of education is really what's brought us, that's impacted a lot of these aspects that we're dealing with right now. And there's certainly different levels to that, right? There's different layers, right? So you've got like formal education, you've got, educating yourself, you've got educating others. So, for instance, formal education, right? K through 12 or K plus education, K through 12 plus, education. There's a lack of, I'll speak from my experience with this, you know what I'm saying? There's a lack of really speaking about people of color's experience in this country as it relates to formal education. I grew up in a military family. I lived all over the world. I was overseas in Europe. I went to, military schools. When I was, in the United States, obviously I went to, schools that were not, military schools. And, shout out to teachers, you know what I'm saying? Like, they definitely have difficult jobs. None of us would be here without teachers. They play a very important and specific role in our society without a doubt. But, there's a Black history and the history of people of color in this country is not spoken about. And I've never experienced a deep dive in that personally in my time going through school. You know what I'm saying? Slavery, if slavery was discussed when I was in school, it was very, very, glossed over. You know what I'm saying? There was never, a lot of information or discussion or really detailed historical context or deep dive into slavery. I never learned about the civil rights movement when I was growing up. Never learned about that in a formal academic setting. And I think that that's a problem. I mean, children are so impressionable. Children are learning. They're sponges. I think the ability to understand the importance and the role that people of color have played in building this country, I mean, that would help to maybe dispel some of these misnomers, dispel some of these stereotypes and prejudices, dispel how we view people. There's always going to be racism and prejudice, but it could be different if that, history of people in this color and their contributions to our society were promoted more and promoted way beyond Black History Month. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have great appreciation for Black History Month, Asian American Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and so on. But I'm 365 Black, you know what I'm saying? And, I don't stop living Black history, and I don't think any of us should. And honestly, it's American history. A lot of, when you're learning about those inventors and those politicians and, the first this and the first that and celebrities, singers, actors, whatever the case may be, who transcended color lines and so on and so forth, and maybe had breakthroughs in science, when the country was thinking that they couldn't think, their white counterparts or whatever. Yeah, it's great. But I celebrate, Black History Month well beyond the month of February, which happens to also be the shortest month of the year. I'm not sure if that's a coincidence. But at any rate, I think it's important for us to infuse that knowledge and that experience into everything that students learn when they're growing up. There wasn't really even a diversity lens, you know what I'm saying, on my formal education as it related to social studies, or history, right? And ironically, even in American history, I didn't learn much about slavery or the civil rights movement, which is a fail, And I would suspect that, many of my, brothers and sisters, whether they be Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, or whatever, might be able to say the exact same thing. But going back to what I was mentioning about the lens, though, I mean, it's June 5th today. Tomorrow's June 6th. June 6th, I mean, we all probably know what happened that day. June 6th is D-Day. You know what I'm saying? When the Allied troops, hit the beaches of Normandy to, go through Europe and try to break the grip that the Nazis had on Europe and such. Well, I learned about D-Day. I learned about, the different names of the beaches of Normandy and so on. But no one ever told me in school of all this, the soldiers of color that were working to fight the oppression and working to, that were fighting and giving up their lives in Europe to fight for freedoms of countries that were under the rule of Nazi Germany. Never learned about the number of people of color that were involved in those ranks and those troops that were also in segregated units, while back at home they were living in a segregated United States, dealing with lynchings, dealing with, just inhumane injustices that were taking place. I never learned about that. Sticking on World War II, you know what I'm saying? I can tell you that, upwards of 10 million or 10 or more million, people perished in the Holocaust. You know what I'm saying? That was taught to me in school, but I never learned how many people were in bondage in the United States, in the colonies and so on and so forth during slavery. I'd venture to say that most people don't even know, when the first slaves came to the United States, 1619, you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot that I think that we can do from a academic standpoint to really ensure that kids, students are aware and they know about the history and the contributions, right, that people of color have made in the the building of this nation. I mean, you have some of our white counterparts who have generational wealth that still exists from those times of slavery, and of course investments, markets, so on and so forth. But you get what I'm saying when I say that, their generational wealth, some of them has transcended time, and it began then. I think there's an opportunity to educate yourself. I mean, there's a lot of narratives and rhetoric and things that I hear people talking about, whether it's celebrities or whether it's, people in workplaces or friends or on, social media or whatever, that is just, I think, tone deaf. I think it's insensitive. I think those words lack a significant amount of empathy as well. And that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But I think that, one thing that we can do, there's many things we can do to educate ourselves, but from a psychological standpoint, we can educate ourselves about our biases. You know what I'm saying? Like, we all possess bias. And I think, especially as it relates to implicit bias. And, if someone says that they don't have bias or they don't see color or whatever the case may be, that's not accurate. You know what I mean? Like, that's not accurate. And if you say you don't see color, that means you're obviously not celebrating people's differences, right? But that's also another conversation for another day. But from going back to implicit bias, I mean, that is probably the foundation of many of the issues that, for instance, Black people have with law enforcement. We have these law enforcement officers, white and Black. We all possess implicit bias, who may look at someone or exert a certain amount of force on somebody that is because they subconsciously see that person to be different, or believe that they may be violating the law in a certain kind of way, or whatever the case may be. We all possess implicit bias. So that's one thing that we can do, people can do, to learn more about, just how they, could be contributing to this problem in this moment that we're having right now. There's a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of resources out there for parents, and regardless if you're white or a person of color, to really how to speak to your children about social justice, how to speak to your children about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of media out there as well. There's just a lot of resources for us, and it's incumbent upon us all to be able to, to continuously understand our fellow man. I think that it's just, we have to empower ourselves with knowledge. I mean, period. I mean, like, going back to the lack of education and such. I mean, take Roots, for example. So the miniseries Roots came out right in the late 70s, early 80s, right? And at that time, it was the highest viewed miniseries of all time, and it very well may still be that way. I'm not sure what the numbers are like, or whatever the case may be, but that's no surprise. It should be no surprise. I mean, the miniseries Roots, you know what I'm saying? The movie Boys in the Hood, you know what I'm saying? Shout out to John Singleton, may he rest in peace. The movie Menace to Society, you know what I'm saying? The reason why that media was so transcendent, of its time, and it was so impactful, is because it gave an insight into a way of life and a history that most people don't know unless they lived it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, being a Black person, we learn about our ancestors. We learn about, just like other people learn about theirs, but we learn about how, I can tell you, my great-great-grandfather's father was a slave in this country. You know what I mean? And, but for my family's heritage, my family's experience, the depth of knowledge I wouldn't have acquired in school. So that's the reason why certain, films like that are so popular, because it gives insight into a way of life that people aren't familiar with, and then that they don't know. You know what I'm saying? So there's a tremendous way. There's a lot of different ways, that you can go about educating yourself. The other is just being quiet and listening. You know what I'm saying? Like, when I'm having these conversations, over the next, 36 days and stuff, I'm going to, try to, infuse some of my personal experience into things. So I'll tell y'all a story right quick. So I was working at this organization, and, it was not, in my opinion, an organization that really held ideals such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and very high. They didn't walk in that light, even though they probably thought they did, right? So there was a circumstance that happened that I thought was wrong. One of the circumstances that happened that I thought was wrong, and it really, into my opinion, created an atmosphere of inequality, created an atmosphere of just lack of empathy for other people that were in the organization. So my father always taught me that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, right? So I spoke on it. Well, what happened was my words were taken in different ways, or whatever the case may be. But one of the things that was said to me by someone in the organization I respected greatly, actually, and who also came and had a heritage of coming from a minority group, or whatever the case may be, was, what, you're talking about inequality, you're talking about equity and such, and what you said, it made sense. Like, I got it, but it just felt sticky. It just felt sticky. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you felt that, I'm bringing up an issue of inequality, and an issue of inclusion, and you're benefiting from a privileged standpoint, and I'm not, and I share that with you, and it feels sticky. I think we all should feel sticky right now. I think that also, we all have privilege. We all have privilege, and we also identify our privilege. You know what I'm saying? I understand that I As a man, there are privileges that I have as how I'm viewed in comparison to my female counterparts. You know what I'm saying? So we all have privilege, and I think that we have a responsibility in privileged positions to be able to be advocates and to not forget about those who are being marginalized. So when that person said to me, yeah, you're talking about, equity, and you're talking about, this particular part of our organization being marginalized, it made sense, but it just felt sticky. Well, I'm sure a lot of things felt sticky. I'm sure a lot of things feel sticky, right? I'm sure, you want to talk about, real examples. I'm sure it felt sticky drinking out of a color fountain that said, a water fountain that said colored on it. I'm sure it felt sticky, being in bondage and, having chains and being whipped and building the White House and, and building roads and picking cotton and, contributing to an economy in a nation that you don't even benefit from, speaking from the slave experience, right? I'm sure that felt sticky as well. I think sometimes, we have to just, in all matters, regardless if they're racial matters or not, just be quiet and just listen. Just be quiet and listen. And again, I'll talk about empathy another day, but, just take a moment to walk in that person, to think about what it's like walking in that person's shoes. So when that was told to me, I was very upset. When she said that to me, I was very upset. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand how they could embody that perspective, but they did. And I haven't spoken to that person since that day, actually. But at any rate, I think the other aspect, I'm going long on this particular topic, but on this particular conversation today, but, as it relates to education, is educating others. There are some people who have a greater knowledge and understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as implicit bias, social justice, social equity, environmental justice, so on and so forth. My father always taught me, bring someone along with you. In any way, shape, or form. If you're doing something positive or something that you identify as being positive, bring somebody along. We're all leaders. You know what I'm saying? Like, someone is always looking up to us. So if you have the ability, in whatever platform you may have, voice your opinion on what you think is right. If you're fighting for the good, you know what I'm saying? Like, do what you think is right, what you believe to be right. And I say that because I've been seeing a lot of conversations. I've been seeing a lot of, some of my white friends have come to me and said, hey, how do I be an ally in this fight? How do I get in this movement, and so on and so forth? And, because they're asking me that, because they're hearing from, their friends of color that are telling them that they need to be quiet, that they need to fall back. And that's wrong. That's a conversation I'm gonna definitely talk about on another day. But I think that if you have the ability to educate someone else, do it. If you have the ability to be the change, do it. There's viral stuff going around on the internet about, some white kids and how they're communicating with their parents about what's happening right now. And also take the mindset that if not me, then who else is going to do it? So, if you are a part of a company, or you're a part of an organization or a church or whatever the case may be, that, holds the ideals of, equity and social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion high, then, make them walk in that light, don't do it in the shadows. We already know it's not enough to simply say that you are not racist, but you have to be anti-racism, you know what I'm saying? Or I can't be racist. I have, 7 black friends, whatever the case may be. Like, we have to be champions in this moment. We have to be champions. So, to dispel and deconstruct these stereotypes that we have going on, to dispel and deconstruct this bias that exists in society. There are biases that, people of color have towards others because of their experiences and because of the historical context there. There are biases that, our white counterparts have towards us because of, what they believe to be true or what they have experienced as well, or whatever the case may be. So, if we take a moment to take a breath and take a step back and think about, why, people feel the way that they feel, or they feel the strife, or they feel the pain and the hurt and the fear, and also somewhat even the distrust of some of the leaders in our community. Think about how they've experienced things, and I'm saying over time, over years and such. So And, what's happening right now is not a moment. This isn't a moment. This has been, it took us a long time to get to where we are. It's going to take us a long time to get out of it. But at any rate, today's conversation that, I wanted to share and have and post up on IG and such was about education as it relates to this moment that we're in right now. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but yeah. Hopefully, God talked to me about, maybe doing something like this in the sense of just, I'm 37 years old. I've been 37 conversations relating to this, to this moment that we're in. And, I believe the one thing I do know about why I'm doing, this and sharing this stuff is that I feel we're not talking enough. So, yeah, we just got to talk more. And, hopefully this is something that begins conversations within people's homes, within friends. Maybe people in comments will communicate with one another, whatever the case may be. Maybe it'll make people be reflective and look inside themselves to see how they're potentially, contributing to this moment that's happening right now in our society. Yeah. So education, y'all, you know what I mean? Like education in school, education, there needs to be education in school regarding, people of color's experience in this country. You need to educate yourself. There are plenty of resources out there about how to speak to your children, how to be an ally, and, continuously, educate others about this moment as well. Talk to y'all tomorrow.